Another crazy weekend of college football and a lot of shakeups in my rankings. Today, we're going to be taking a look at my top 25 after week 7 of the college football season. Before we get to today's video, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you're watching this video, odds are that you love college football, and odds are you aren't subscribed to my channel. So make sure to subscribe to one of the best college football communities here on YouTube. I'll be posting college football videos all season, so make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. Ohio State was off this week, but I made a video talking about why I think they're the best team in the nation, so we have the Buckeyes at number 1. Georgia took care of business against Vanderbilt as they took them down 55-0. This was once again another dominant Georgia performance on both sides of the ball. For the game, they finished with nearly 600 yards of total offense and held Vanderbilt to only 150 yards of total offense. The Bulldogs are 7-0 on the season, and they're one of the best overall teams in the nation. Climbing up to number 3 is Tennessee, who's now 6-0 on the season and just defeated Alabama 52-49. It was one of the craziest games of the entire season, but the Vols came out on top at the very end. Hendon Hooker threw for nearly 400 yards with 5 passing touchdowns. Jalen Hyatt had one of the craziest games you'll see from a wide receiver as he caught 6 passes for 200 yards with 5 passing touchdowns. Sure, the defense wasn't fantastic for Tennessee as they allowed nearly 50 points and nearly 600 yards of total offense, but the Vols are undefeated and they're a legitimate threat in the college football playoff. Michigan moved to 7-0 on the season with a 41-17 defeat of number 10 Penn State. This was a close game at the half as Michigan led by only 2 points, but they outscored the Nittany Lions 25-3 in the second half. The game belonged to Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum as they had one of the best games you'll see from a running back duo in college football. Donovan Edwards rushed for 173 yards with 2 rushing scores. Blake Corum rushed for 166 yards with 2 rushing scores as well. I know a lot of hype is surrounding teams like Ohio State, Georgia, and Tennessee, but don't sleep on this Michigan Wolverines team this year. Clemson moved to 7-0 on the season after a 6-point victory over Florida State. This game looked like it was out of reach entering the fourth quarter as the Tigers led by 20 points, but a late comeback from Florida State almost led them to pulling off the upset. DJ Ucla threw for 200 yards with 3 passing touchdowns. He also added a touchdown on the ground as well. For Clemson, they're just another team that's kind of floating under the radar. They're 7-0 on the season, and they look like they're in the driver's seat to be a potential playoff team. Here's where we have Alabama falling after their last second loss to Tennessee. Bryce Young had himself quite the day as he threw for 450 yards with 2 passing touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs added 100 yards on the ground with 3 rushing scores and 5 receptions for 50 yards through the air. Overall, I still think Alabama is one of the 10 best teams in all of college football, but this marks yet another game this season in which their game came down to the wire. This was their first loss of the season, but honestly, you can make the case this should have been their second or even their third loss this year. TCU is legit, and they're the best team in the Big 12 as they knocked off number 8 Oklahoma State in double overtime. This game looked like it was over early on as the Horned Frogs trailed by 11 points at the half. Entering the fourth quarter, they trailed by 14 points. But 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter helped TCU tie the game and send it to overtime. Max Duggan continues his Heisman campaign as he threw for 300 yards with 2 passing touchdowns. He also added 60 yards on the ground with a rushing score. All of a sudden, TCU is the only undefeated team remaining in the entire Big 12, and it looks like they're the conference's best shot of a team reaching the college football playoff. Things got a little interesting later in this game, but Ole Miss handled Auburn, defeating them by 14 points. The Rebels are now 7-0 on the season and 3-0 in conference play. Don't look now, but after Alabama's loss, Ole Miss is now in first place in the SEC West. UCLA was off this week, so here's where we have them. Oregon was also off this week, so here's where we have them as well. Utah pulled off the insane victory as they defeated USC 43-42. With less than a minute left, the Utes opted to go for 2, which proved to be the difference maker in the game as it gave them the 1-point lead. Cameron Rising had the best game of his entire career. He threw for over 400 yards yards with 2 passing touchdowns while rushing for 60 yards with 3 rushing scores. Although Utah's playoff hopes are probably shot, they still have a chance to make the Pac-12 title game and win the Pac-12. One spot behind the Utes is USC, who lost a heartbreaking game in the final minute. Caleb Williams threw for nearly 400 yards with 5 passing touchdowns. Overall, USC did enough on offense to win this game, but their defense just couldn't stop Utah. They allowed nearly 600 yards of total offense and 31 first downs. I talked about USC earlier in the week as to whether or not they were overrated or underrated. Well, they had their first real test of the season against a really good team, and they lost. This looked like a game the Cowboys were going to win, but they fell to TCU in double overtime. Spencer Sanders didn't have a great day at quarterback as he completed less than 50% of his passes and only threw 1 touchdown with an interception. This was a game that it looked like Oklahoma State was going to win early on, but their defense just had no answer for TCU in overtime. For the game, they allowed the Horned Frogs to rack up more than 500 yards of total offense. Between the second half and overtime, they allowed TCU to score 30 points. Things were looking good for this Oklahoma State team, but just like that, this loss has them 4th in the Big 12. Wake Forest was off this week, so this is where we have them. After a rough couple of weeks, Kentucky responded with one of their best wins of the entire season, a 10-point victory over number 16 Mississippi State. Chris Rodriguez Jr. had one of the best games of his career as he rushed for 200 yards with 2 rushing scores. Like I mentioned, this has been a rough couple of weeks for this Wildcats team, but this might be a victory that gets their season right back on track. Syracuse just continues to impress this season as they knocked off number 15 NC State. Overall, it was a pretty quiet game for their offense as they scored only 24 points. They finished the game with under 400 yards of total offense and had 2 turnovers. But the defense was able to hold NC State to essentially nothing. They held the Wolfpack to only 160 yards through the air, and they held them to under 100 yards on the ground while averaging 2.5 yards a carry. The Orange are still undefeated on the season, and they're one of only 2 teams in the entire ACC that is yet to lose a game. Well, the other undefeated team is Clemson, and that's who Syracuse has to play on the road next week. Kansas State was off this week, so here's where we have them. It looked like Penn State could potentially pull off the upset at the end of the first half as they trailed Michigan by only 2 points. But they were outscored by 22 points in the second half as they fell to Michigan by 24. This was just an awful game all around by the Nittany Lions. For the game, Penn State was 12 of 29 for 150 yards through the air. They had only 10 first downs for the entire game. Plus, their offense was barely on the field as they had possession for only 18 minutes. Cincinnati was off this week, so here's where I have them. Illinois continues to surprise as they've been one of the more shocking teams in the Big Ten this season. They picked up a victory over a really good Minnesota team, defeating them by 12 points. Tommy DeVito threw for over 250 yards with a passing touchdown, while Chase Brown added 180 yards on the ground and had 50 yards through the air with a receiving touchdown. The defense held Minnesota to only 12 first downs, including only 38 yards through the air. Things are looking good for Illinois in the Big Ten as they're in the driver's seat in regards to playing in the Big Ten title game. North Carolina is finally in the top 25 as they move to 6-1 on the season with a thrilling victory over Duke. A touchdown from Drake May with 15 seconds left in the game gave the Tar Heels the 3-point victory. Speaking of Drake May, he threw for nearly 400 yards with 3 passing touchdowns while leading the Tar Heels with 70 yards on the ground. The Tar Heels are one of only 3 teams that are undefeated in ACC play, and it looks like they could be the representative in the ACC title game from the Coastal Division. It wasn't a pretty game for Texas, but they pulled out the victory at the end, defeating Iowa State by 3 points. Quinn Ewers threw for 170 yards with 3 passing touchdowns. Bijan Robinson totaled 180 yards of total offense. Although the Longhorns were an upset watch, they still pulled out the victory and are now 5-2 on the season and still have a chance of reaching the Big 12 title game. One of the more underrated teams in the Big 10 this season has been Purdue. They picked up their 5th win of the season as they defeated Nebraska by 6 points. Aiden O'Connell threw for 400 yards with 4 passing touchdowns, while as a team, the Boilermakers rushed for over 200 yards with a rushing score. I talked about Illinois being in the driver's seat to reach the Big Ten title game, but Purdue's in the same situation as well. Both Purdue and Illinois are 3-1 on the season in conference play, and the 2 teams meet up in just a couple of weeks. It wasn't a pretty game for Mississippi State as they fell to Kentucky. This offense was pretty much non-existent for the entire game as they totaled only 225 yards of total offense. They had only 13 first downs and scored only 17 points. We'll wrap up this top 25 with a brand new team in Tulane, who moved to 6-1 on the season with their 45-31 victory over South Florida. Michael Pratt Matt threw for over 300 yards with 2 passing touchdowns while rushing in 2 touchdowns as well. We talk about Cincinnati being the best Group of 5 team in college football, but keep an eye out for Tulane. They're 3-0 in conference play, and they're 6-1 on the season. Well, that wraps it up for my top 25. Was there a team you think I had ranked too high or too low, or a team that wasn't ranked in the top 25 at all? Whoever you think that team is, let me know in the comment section down below. Before you leave, make sure to smash that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you love college football, this is definitely the place for you. Also, make sure to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.